Hare Krishna, devotees. Welcome to day 60 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto. And we are in the 21st chapter of the third canto. 21st chapter. And it's all about, well, let me just check. The title is Conversation Between Manu and Kardama. And we are entering, we're in the last section, number 5, verse 36 to 56. Swayambhuva Manu visits Kardama Muni, and we've already read through all of the verses yesterday, and now we're going to go through in detail the verses and the purports. Okay, so here we go. First of all, let us chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachyadesh Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchkalpatarubhyas Cha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Right, so this 21st chapter has 56 verses. So this section from verse 36 to 56 is the last part of the 21st chapter. Like I said, we already read the verses through yesterday. So now let's go through in detail. Verse 36. Swayambhuva Manu, just a sec. Change my glasses. Swayambhuva Manu, with his wife, mounted his chariot, which was decorated with golden ornaments. Placing his daughter on it with them, he began traveling all over the earth. Right, so there's a very short purport here. Actually, what is it? It's only one sentence. And Prabhupada makes the point that Swayambhuva Manu, he is very big man. He's the ruler of the whole world. He could have engaged an agent to find a husband for his daughter, but because of their very, very close loving relationship, as a father, he took care of it all himself. Right. So on we go to verse 37. Over Dura, they reached the hermitage of the sage, who had just completed his vows of austerity on the very day foretold by the Lord. Okay, so there's no purport to verse 37. Let us go on to verses 38 and 39, which are together. The holy lake Bindu Sarova, flooded by the waters of the river Saraswati, was resorted to by hosts of eminent sages. Its holy water was not only auspicious, but as sweet as nectar. It was called Bindu Sarova because drops of tears had fallen there from the eyes of the Lord, who was overwhelmed by extreme compassion for the sage who had sought his protection. So we can note that Bindu means tears, drops of tears. Sarova, of course, means lake. So the lake, at least in which there were tears from the eyes of the Lord, because of his feelings of compassion for Kardama Muni, who had come to him for his protection, feeling the need to get a wife by the mercy of the Lord. So there's a purport here. Let's have a look. That Kardama Muni had undergone austerities specifically to get the mercy of the Lord. And when the Lord arrived, he was so compassionate, he shed tears. And either that lake was just made of the tears of the Lord, or it was a lake in which there were tears. But one way or the other, because of the tears of the Lord, the lake is now known, at that time at least, as Bindu Sarovar. So, and Prabhupada makes the point that therefore Bindu Sarovar is worshipable because the Lord and his tears are not different. And Prabhupada mentions, just as drops of perspiration from the toe of the Lord became the Ganges, means Lord Vamana, so tears here became Bindu Sarovar. So in other words, it does sound like the lake is just made of tears of the Lord. So, but anyway, therefore, the water of Bindu Sarovar is described as Shiv Amrita Jala. And in this context, Shiva doesn't refer to Lord Shiva. Prabhupada says it means curing, that anyone who drinks water from Bindu Sarovar is cured of all diseases, just like they say, if you bathe in the Ganges, it cures you of all health problems. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, these claims are accepted by great scholars and authorities and are still being acted upon, even in this fallen age of Kali. Right, so verse 40. The shore of the lake was surrounded by clusters of pious trees and creepers, rich in fruits and flowers of all seasons, that afforded shelter to pious animals and birds, which uttered various cries. It was adorned by the beauty of groves of forest trees. So, actually we discussed this point a few days ago, maybe a week anyway, some number of days ago, not a long time ago, that as there are pious people who are very nice and gentle and cultured, and they're not aggressive, they're not gross, but they're very much in the mode of goodness. So similarly, there are pious trees, pious birds, pious trees. Prabhupada discusses that pious trees basically means beautiful trees which don't have thorns. They give very nice fruit, they give very nice flowers. These are pious trees. And pious birds, the typical example given is the swans. Swans, they inhabit very nice lakes which are full of clear water, and they don't go to the rubbish dumps like the impious birds, like the crows. Yes. So therefore you get pious and impious trees, birds, and like that. But around Bindu Sarovar, there was not a single impious bird or tree. And Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by making reference to this, every tree bore fruits and flowers, and every bird sang the glories of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Right, so on we go to verse 41. The area resounded with the notes of overjoyed birds. Intoxicated bees wandered there. Intoxicated peacocks proudly danced, and merry cuckoos called one another. So Srila Prabhupada gives very brief purport that it's a description of the beauty of the place. And Prabhupada, let me just read the last couple of sentences. After drinking honey, the black bees became maddened, and they hummed in intoxication. Merry peacocks danced just like actors and actresses, and merry cuckoos called their mates very nicely. We go on to verses 42 and 43. Lake Bindu Sarova was adorned by flowering trees, such as Kadamba, Champak, Ashok, Karanja, Bakula, Asana, Kunda, Mandara, Kutaja, and young mango trees. The air was filled with the pleasing notes of Karandava ducks, plovers, swans, ospreys, waterfowl, cranes, chakravakas, and chakoras. Prabhupada is of just a short purport, very short. Prabhupada makes an interesting point at the beginning. For most of the trees, flowers, fruits, and birds here, English synonyms can't be found. So, but anyway, Kadamba trees are well known. We just use these Sanskrit names, the traditional names. Champak is very well known. Ashok is very well known. Not all of the trees, but Bakul is very well known. Then, of course, swans, ospreys. Most of these birds actually are known. So anyway, all the different trees mentioned here, they're all very pious. And they produce nice aromatic flowers. And the birds, they are also, relatively speaking, pious. And they created, through their singing, a very suitable spiritual atmosphere around the lake. Right, so we go on to verse 44. Its shores abounded with deer, boars, porcupines, gavayas, elephants, baboons, lions, monkeys, mongooses, and musk deer. So, anyway, let's have a look at the purport. Of course, the first point we could mention is that all the trees and the birds, which we just read about, they're all considered very pious. These animals here are not always considered pious. So, but anyway, there they are. Prabhupada in the purport notes the musk deer. Musk deer are not common. They really are not common. Prabhupada says they're only found in places like Bindu Sarova, and the musk deer themselves are always intoxicated by the aroma of musk secreted from their navels, their own aromas, in other words. They're always intoxicated with them. Then Gavayas, they're pious. They're a type of cow which has a bunch of hair at the end of their tails, which is used, and we call it chamara. It's used in temple worship to fan deities, and therefore Gavayas are sometimes called chamaris, because they give chamaras, and they are considered very sacred. So, and Prabhupada mentions in India you still get gypsies who sell musk and chamaras. And yes, I've encountered in Vrindavan, I mean, I haven't seen them for years, because I haven't spent much time in Vrindavan for years. But I definitely saw these gypsy-type people trying to sell us little, it was actually the navel somehow cut out of a musk deer, and they were dabbing it on us and trying to sell it to us. Krishna, Krishna. So anyway, the musk and the chamaras, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, these are always in great demand for the higher classes of Hindu population, and such business still goes on in large cities and villages in India. So on we go to verses 45, 46, and 47, though 3 verses are together. Right, okay. Entering that most sacred spot with his daughter and going near the sage, the first monarch, Swayambhuva Manu, saw the sage sitting in his hermitage, having just propitiated the sacred fire by offering oblations into it. His body shone most brilliantly, though he had engaged in austere penance for a long time. Let me just read that again. His body shone most brilliantly. Though he had engaged in austere penance for a long time, he was not emaciated, for the Lord had cast his affectionate, sidelong glance upon him, and he had also heard the nectar flowing from the moon-like words of the Lord. The sage was tall, his eyes were large, like the petals of a lotus, and he had matted locks on his head. He was clad in rags. Swayambhuva Manu approached and saw him to be somewhat soiled, like an unpolished gem. So, well, of course, there's a purport here, which we'll go through. We could just note, it's just a very interesting point, and I'm not sure if Prabhupada, maybe he addresses it, maybe he doesn't, but I just thought it should be addressed, that Swayambhuva Manu, he is the king of the world. He is so wealthy, you just couldn't calculate the extent of his wealth. And now he wants to give his daughter in marriage to a suitable person, someone she is going to feel at home with, so to speak, that their relation, that they'll really have a natural relationship and be very happy together. Similar, very similar people. But here is Kardama Muni. He is dressed in rags. And of course, Devahuti is definitely not dressed in rags. Absolutely the opposite. The most opulent and with jewelry and all that. And Swayambhuva Manu then approached Kardama and saw him to be somewhat soiled. Maybe not entirely clean or something. Well, no, Prabhupada, the verse is, like an unpolished gem. So on that level, it would appear that Kardama Muni and Devahuti are not like birds of a feather who are going to just naturally come together. They are really very different types of persons, but actually it's not the case. And of course that will become clearer as the discussion goes on. It'll become very clear indeed. But it's just an interesting point to note here at the beginning. So the thing is, now we look at the purport, and the first thing is that at this stage of his life, Kardama Muni is a brahmachari, and he has been for thousands of years. He did his austerities, etc., for 10,000 years. So in terms of ashram, right at the moment, he is not a grihasta yet. He is going to become one just now, but right at this point, he is not a grihasta. He is a brahmachari. So, therefore, Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, here are some descriptions of a brahmachari yogi. Yeah. So Prabhupada gives some descriptions of the duties and practices of a brahmachari yogi. So first thing is that a serious brahmachari seeking spiritual elevation, he is hutasana. He must offer sacrificial oblations to the Lord. So Prabhupada, the way Prabhupada puts it, is that a brahmachari cannot sleep until 7 or 9 in the morning, must get up and do hutasana, sacrificial oblations to the Lord, which in this age means they must get up. A real brahmachari should get up, Prabhupada says, early, at least 1.5 hours before the sun rises. Of course, that depends where that brahmachari is living. I mean, in India, it's very easy because you don't get the extremes of long days in the summer and long nights in the winter. Because if I've been at least in the Arctic Circle on numerous occasions, visiting Murmansk, where we have nice temple. There's quite a few devotees. And if you only, if you had to, get up, what does it say? An hour and a half before the sunrise. Yeah, at least 1.5 hours before the sun rises. Well, in those very northern or very southern areas, because on the southern side, there's not much land mass, but in the north, there's a lot of land in the Arctic Circle, and if you had to get up an hour and a half before the sunrise. Well, in the summer, you would never take rest because the sun is always up 24 hours a day. And in the winter, you would never get up because the sun never rises. Yes. So anyway, one has to we advise devotees in these areas, particularly, like I said, the majority would be in the northern hemisphere, like northern Russia, northern Canada, these types of places, and some parts of northern Europe. You have to use your intelligence, and regulate yourself because you need to take rest, and you need to take rest during the summer, and you cannot just sleep all day during the winter. Right, so anyway, Prabhupada recommended 6 hours, not more than 7, but around 6 hours generally. Right, so anyway, back to the purport. Prabhupada says, from the features, from the features of Kardama, it appeared he had undergone great austerities. That's the sign of one observing brahmacharya, the vow of celibacy. And if one lives otherwise, it'll be manifest in the lust, visible in his face and body. And Prabhupada makes the point, the word vidyotamanam indicates that the brahmachari feature showed in his body. That is the certificate that one has undergone great austerity in yoga. And therefore, Prabhupada makes the point, a drunkard or smoker or sex monger can never be eligible to practice yoga. Prabhupada makes the point, generally the yogis are skinny, but Kardama Muni was not skinny because he had seen the Lord face to face. He looked healthy because he had heard nectarian sounds from the lips of the Lord. So similarly, Prabhupada says, if one chants Hare Krishna, one's health will improve. And Kardama, in regard to him not being skinny, having heard from the lips of the Lord, seen the Lord face to face, Srila Prabhupada refers to a term from the verse Snigdha Panga Valokanat, which is a term from it's verse 46, the last line. And Snigdha Panga Valokanat means that Kardama was fortunate enough to see the Supreme Lord face to face. And, right, he looked healthy. We mentioned because he had heard nectarian sounds from the lips of the Lord. So similarly, Prabhupada makes the point that if we hear the transcendental sound vibration of the Lord, Hare Krishna, our health will improve. And Prabhupada says that we've actually seen that many brahmacharis and grihastas connected with the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, we see they've improved in health. and a luster has come to their faces. And Prabhupada says, it is essential that a brahmachari engaged in spiritual advancement look very healthy and lustrous. Right. So there's a story. I don't know if it's well known or not, but it's there, a story about Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was in New York for the Rath Yatra one time. And Prabhupada generally was effulgent. So anyway, Prabhupada was at the place where the Rath Yatra begins, the procession begins at one end of Fifth Avenue, New York. And Prabhupada was looking effulgent, lustrous. And there were two New York cops there, New York policemen, who generally they're very tough people. They're tough. So they're just sort of hanging out there because they're meant to be sort of overseeing the procession. So they're just sort of hanging around, looking around. And then suddenly one of them saw Srila Prabhupada. And he grabbed the other one and said, "Hey, look at that guy." That's Prabhupada he's referring to. Look at that guy. He's shining. Yes. So that happens with brahmacharis. And of course sannyasis also, because a sannyasi, sometimes it's said, I mean, you don't find it much, but it's there, that a sannyasi, in one sense, is a type of brahmachari, because they're both celibate, and they're both preaching and generally leading austere lives. So then Srila Prabhupada goes on to say that the comparison of Kardama Muni to an unpolished gem is very appropriate. And Prabhupada makes the point, well, actually Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, even if a gem just taken from a mine looks unpolished, the luster of the gem cannot be stopped. Similarly, although Kardama was not properly dressed and his body was not properly cleansed, his overall appearance was gem-like. Right, okay. Verse 48. Seeing that the monarch had come to his hermitage and was bowing before him, the sage greeted him with benediction and received him with due honor, which is an interesting point, that Kardama, well, he blessed him, gave benediction. That's there. Brahmins do that, and it's one of their duties to give blessings. But he honored him. Kardama Muni honored Swambhuva Manu. And you might say, someone might say, well, Kardama Muni is a Brahmin, he's a great sage, a great renunciate, a great mystic, you could say, like that, and a great devotee, of course. And Swambhuva Manu is a Kshatriya. And Kshatriyas are definitely beneath the Brahmins. But the thing is that Swambhuva Manu, he's Rajarshi, he's a Raja Rishi. He is a king, or he's actually an emperor, which means king of kings. He's an emperor, but he's also a great saintly person. So therefore, Kardama honored him. So anyway, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada makes a couple of points, very short purport, that Swayambhuva Manu, when he came, he bowed down and offered obeisances. Yeah. And similarly, it was the duty, we mentioned, it was the duty of Kardama as a Brahmin to offer blessings to such a king who had come to his hermitage. Right, so on we go. Verse 49. After receiving the sage's attention, the king sat down and was silent. Recalling the instructions of the Lord, Kardama then spoke to the king as follows, delighting him with his sweet accents. So there's no purport to that verse. So we go on to verse 50. So this is Kardama speaking to Swayambhuva Manu. The tour you have undertaken, O Lord, is surely intended to protect the virtuous and kill the demons, since you embody the protecting energy of Sri Hari. So, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that we read in different Vedic literatures, especially historical literatures like the Bhagavatam and other Puranas, that the kings, the pious kings, the good kings of old, they used to go out and tour their kingdoms. They didn't just sit at home and have representatives going out and doing all the work, but they toured around to check on things and to take action when action was required, if something was going wrong. So Prabhupada says that they used to tour their kingdoms in order to give protection to the pious citizens and to chastise or kill the impious. And of course, you may remember in the, what would you say, second half of the first canto, there was the story of Maharaj Parikshit doing exactly that. That he was touring around as the king. And as he was touring, he found some of the citizens, you can say, a cow and a bull. They're also considered citizens of the kingdom, and they must be protected by the king and the government. So he found them being horribly harassed by this strange-looking fellow. He didn't look like he was a member of one of the higher orders of society, but he was dressed as a king, and it was the personality of Kali. So I'm sure you remember that. And then Maharaj Parikshit came and just confronted him completely fearlessly. Just completely confronted him right to the face. What are you doing? Anyone who does things like this in this kingdom, they die. And he pulled out his sword, and he was just about to kill Kali on the spot. Yeah. But then Kali surrendered to him and said, I'm also one of your citizens, so you have to protect me too. So in order to sort of keep in practice with killing and sometimes using like really heavy violence, which was sometimes completely necessary for the Kshatriyas, the warriors, sometimes they would go into the forest and hunt animals and not just shoot them from, some hundreds of meters away with some high power rifle, but like the kings, they would go and fight with no weapons sometimes, even against tigers, or maybe just with a knife, in order to practice what Prabhupada calls the killing art. The killing art, because it's not so simple. Right. And the Kshatriyas are allowed to do that because violence, Prabhupada says, violence for a good purpose is part of their duty. Yeah. So, Vadaya Asatam, for the purpose of killing those who are undesirable. Because that's what Kshatriya means, Shat. Shat means pain. And Triya comes from the verb triyate, which means to protect. So Kshatriya is a person who protects innocent people who are not capable of defending themselves. Kshatriya means the person who protects them from pain, from being harassed and abused. Right. So, yeah. So that protecting energy of the king is actually the energy of the Lord, Prabhupada says. Supposed to be the energy of the Supreme Lord. And Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, verse 8. We've all been referring to it from time to time, that Krishna comes paritranaya sadhunam, to protect the sadhus, the pious, and vinashaya chaduskritam. You probably remember we talked about this term in that verse, vinash, very much destroy. Duskritam, the miscreants. There is sukrita and duskrita. Krita means merit, like some qualification, good qualification, like that. So sukrita means someone who's got good qualification and uses it for good purposes. Dushkritana means someone who's got qualification, got some intelligence, got some strength, but they use it for bad purposes. Yeah, miscreants. So Srila Prabhupada goes on to say that the potency, the Shakti, the power, the potency to do that is directly an energy of the Lord, and the king is meant to have it. The king is, or the chief executives of the state, is supposed to possess such energy. Yes, well, okay, yeah, that's there. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in this age it is very difficult to find such a head of state who is expert in killing the undesirables. Modern heads of state sit very nicely in their palaces and try, without reason, to kill innocent persons. Well, I was going to refer to the recently crowned King Charles III of England. Krishna. He's not really that type of king or head of state. What can you do? It's Kali Yuga. Is it ever Kali Yuga? Right-o, so verse 51. verse 51. You assume, when necessary, the part of the sun god, the moon god, Agni, the god of fire, Indra, the lord of paradise, Vayu, the wind god, Yama, the god of punishment, Dharma, the god of piety, and Varuna, the god presiding over the waters. All obeisances to you, who are none other than Lord Vishnu. So Prabhupada makes the point in the purport. First point he makes is that really, because Kardama is a Brahmin and Swayambhuva is a Kshatriya, so Kardama should not really, he's not really supposed to offer praise and obeisances to the king, because his position is definitely higher. But he did so. He did so. Because Manu, as the king and emperor, was the representative of the Supreme Lord, of Lord Krishna. Therefore, he did that. Because these verses, last few verses we've been reading, that's been Kardama, glorifying Swayambhuva Manu. So, the Lord is always worshipable, regardless of whether he is Brahmin, Kshatriya, or Sudra. If it's the Supreme Lord, he's always worshipable. What to speak of being, someone lower down like a Sudra? Even if he's an animal, he's worshipable, as we were just reading. Anyway, as in the case of Lord Varaha. But anyway, as far as the king is concerned, as Prabhupada says, as the representative of the Supreme Lord, the king deserved respectful obeisances from everyone. Okay, so on we go to verses 52 to 53, 3 verses together. And again, it's Kardama glorifying Swayambhuva Manu. If you did not mount your victorious jeweled chariot, whose mere presence threatens culprits, if you did not produce fierce sounds by the twanging of your bow, and if you did not roam about the world like the brilliant sun, leading a huge army whose trampling feet cause the globe of the earth to tremble, then all the moral laws governing the varnas and ashrams created by the Lord himself would be broken by the rogues and rascals. Okay, so let's go into the purport here. It's the duty of the king or the government to protect Varnashram, basically. That's the point. Srila Prabhupada goes into quite a description of Varnashram and its application here. Yes. And what is not Varnashram? Because now, anyway, we'll go through it briefly. Now there's no real Varnashram, there's hardly. But now there's a hereditary caste system. If you're born in such and such a family, with that sort of background, you're identified like that for your whole life. And you can't change your position. So, but human society, a real human society, means society which is making progress to self-realization, and it's known as Arya or Aryan, and that term Arya means those who are advancing. So what's society? Prabhupada asks. Prabhupada says the question is, which society is advancing? And Prabhupada answers it that it's not a society which is advancing in creating material so-called necessities unnecessarily, and in this way wasting human energy in just chasing human comforts. The Aryan society is progressing spiritually. So Prabhupada explains that the intelligent men, the Brahmins, exemplified by Karadama, they were engaged in advancing spiritually, and the Kshatriyas would rule and ensure that facilities for self-realization were provided. So Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, Indian civilization on the basis of the 4 varnas and ashrams deteriorated because of her dependency on foreigners or those who did not follow the civilization of Varnashram. Thus the Varnashram system has now been degraded into the caste system. Right, so there is a second paragraph. The Varnashram system is confirmed to be Bhagavad Rachita, which means designed by the Lord. So, and this, of course, this is confirmed Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 13, very famous verse, everyone should learn it. Chaturvanya maya srishtam guna karma vibhagasha. That the system of the 4 varnas and ashrams was maya srishtam, created by me, guna karma vibhagasha, based on people's guna, their nature, and their karma, the type of work they do. And guna and karma, of course, are very closely connected, generally, yeah. So, right, so it's Krishna's program. So Prabhupada makes the point that because these varnas and ashrams were made by the Lord, they can't just be extinguished just like that. Like the sun, they will stay. The sun is there, whether it's a cloudy day or a clear day. The sun will still be there. So similarly, Varnashram will be there, despite the immediate circumstances, which may be encouraging Varnashram or discouraging Varnashram. Because even in some fallen, degraded society, you still get intelligent people, you still get business people, you still get laborers, you still get a martial class. Yeah. So these things, though, they need to be regulated. They need to be regulated. Regulated according to the Vedic principles, then there'll be peace and harmony. But when there is, Prabhupada says, when there's hatred and malpractice and mutual mistrust in the caste system, the whole system becomes degraded, and it creates a deplorable situation. Yeah, well, that's very true. When people who are just born in a Brahmin family, but actually they have the qualification of Sudras, but they're insisting they must be treated respectfully. And people who are born in Sudra families, but even if they're highly intelligent, but they must be kept down like laborers, well, you've got a degraded situation. So Prabhupada says, now the world is in a deplorable state because of giving rights to so many interests This is due to the degradation of the 4 varnas and ashrams. What do you think of that? Isn't that an important point? Verse 55. Because if you give up all thought of the world's situation, unrighteousness would flourish, for men who hanker only after money would be unopposed. Such miscreants would attack, and the world would perish. Yes, well, welcome to Kali Yuga, devotees. Yeah. So anyway, Prabhupada describes that because Varnashram is being, he says, extinguished, the entire world is governed by unwanted men who have no training in religion, politics, or social order. Maybe they're lawyers, but not more than that. But in Varnashram, there's training. There's training. Like for Kshatriyas, there was training, so that when they're mature and ready to take up actively their occupational duty, if they're ruling class, they would be ready, fully trained to rule. Yeah, but otherwise, caste by birth, Prabhupada says, caste by birth degrades everything. So now society is in chaos. There's no peace or prosperity. You know, an example typically given by the devotees is that if your father is a surgeon who performs operations in a hospital, then through his association you might be inclined to take the training and then become a surgeon too. I mean, it definitely happens sometimes. But if you don't, but just because you're the son of a surgeon, if someone comes along and says, I need an operation, you say, fine, I'll do it, because you're the son of a surgeon, but you have no training. That's not going to work, is it? So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, it is clearly stated herein that unless there is the vigilance of a strong king, impious, unqualified men will claim a certain status in society. And that will make the social order perish. In other words, it'll cease to be completely. So verse 56 is the last verse. In spite of all this, I ask you, O valiant king. This is Kardama, of course, continuing again. So, in spite of all this, I ask you, O valiant king, the purpose for which you've come here. Whatever it may be, we shall carry it out without reservation. That's interesting. Yeah. Without reservation. Of course, Kardama knows. He's not just being submissive. Yeah, he knows what's going on. So anyway, Prabhupada makes the point, when a guest comes to a friend's house, it's understood there's some special purpose. So Kardama could understand Swayambhuva Manu. He's the emperor of the whole world, and he comes to some little hermitage in the forest. Swayambhuva must have some special purpose. And he was ready to fulfill Manu's desire, particularly because he knew what it was, and he was very happy about that. So in the past, Brahmins would visit Kshatriyas and vice versa, and each would be glad to fulfill the other's purpose. This is, Prabhupada says, this is called Bhakti Karya, this reciprocal relationship is called Bhakti Karyaya. So the Kshatriyas would protect the Brahmins would give valuable instructions on how the state and citizens could be elevated, and everything would develop wonderfully. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.